Philadelphia's second annual Solar Week. For 2020, we've had a webinar series going on each day, along with additional events for homeowners interested in looking at solar for their own properties. So we started off the week with Solar 101, everything you need to know to go solar during COVID-19. We were joined by Councilmember Gilmore Richardson and Director of Sustainability Christine Knapp, as well as Micah from Solar States, talking about how to go solar in 2020. And yesterday we had a really compelling conversation with our workforce development partners, and we were joined by Council President Darrell Clark, as well as Sean Garrison from the Solar Energy Industries Association, who provided a national perspective on the potential role that solar can play in driving the recovery of the economy. So we had a great week so far. So glad for those of you who are able to come back and join us this morning, or if you're new to be signing on for Solar Week today. The focus of this webinar this morning is scaling up to combat climate change, Pennsylvania's growing utility scale solar market. We can go to the next slide. So we're joined by a strong lineup of speakers who are going to provide a variety of perspectives on utility scale solar in Pennsylvania. So first, we're going to start off with Brent Alderfer, and he is the CEO and founder of Community Energy. So Brent started his company 20 years ago and has a track record of developing renewable energy projects at grid scale, including some of the first large solar projects to power web servers for Amazon Web Services and other major corporate purchasers. With a mission to transform the grid to economic, climate-safe power, the company led the expansion of wind generation a decade ago and the more recent expansion of large-scale solar nationally. Prior to forming Community Energy, Brent served as a Colorado Public Utility Commissioner. Brent holds an electrical engineering degree from Northeast University, 1974, and a law degree from Georgetown University. So we're really lucky to have Brent joining us. He'll be starting off the conversation, and then we'll be hearing from Amanda Warwood, who is the energy manager for the city of Philadelphia. She manages the team that leads city municipal energy operations, including procurement, utility bill management, and the development of conservation, efficiency, and renewable energy projects and programs. Amanda has 13 years of experience in the energy field, where she's worked in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors. Then we'll be hearing from Ben Suplick from UPenn, and he'll be speaking about the recent offsite solar power purchase agreement that Penn just signed following on the heels of the city. So we'll be hearing from Ben about that project, and Ben is the Director of Engineering and Energy Planning for Facilities and Real Estate Planning at UPenn. Ben has been with Penn for 9 years, and prior to Penn, he was Assistant Chief of Operations at Rowan University and Director of Facilities at Philadelphia University. Ben has over 35 years of engineering expertise, and he leads an engineering team whose responsibilities include a campus-wide building control system, vigorous recommissioning program design reviews, energy metering, and operations. Ben has a BS in mechanical engineering from the University of Notre Dame, and an MBA from the University of St. Thomas, and a master's in liberal studies from Villanova University. And he's also a licensed professional engineer in Pennsylvania. And then we'll be wrapping it up with comments from Matt Mooney, who is the Director of Business Development for ENGIE. He joined ENGIE North America in 2016, and for the past 15 years, he has led teams in diverse roles, including development and power purchase agreement origination for grid-scale wind, solar, and storage projects. He spent his entire career working on renewable energy projects, product offerings, and policy. And he leads utility scale solar initiatives on behalf of ENGIE North America. So we're lucky to have Matt joining us. So I'll go ahead and pass it off to Brent to kick it off with some of the context of where we've come from in terms of utility scale solar in Pennsylvania. Thanks so much, Brent.
Great. See if we can get a look at this right here. Thanks, Laura.
Good. Yeah, if you want to go to full screen, we see it.
Yeah, so hopefully you're looking at photos of 3 different types of solar, and I want to set the framework what we're talking about today. So the bottom right is rooftop solar, which until as recently as 8 to 10 years ago was the only form of solar we really had developed in Pennsylvania or most of the country. And rooftop solar, of course, is maybe on your home or maybe at your business, but it displaces load, it replaces generation or reduces load right at the site. And it's a big part of what we need to do moving forward, but it's not the whole part. Then the picture on the left shows that the next thing we've been working on, Pennsylvania still doesn't have, is community solar, which lets you build a little bit larger solar farms that feed the distribution system of the utility, local, called community level. And that might serve the load of maybe 100 residential customers, maybe a little bit more. And then we have utility scale at the top, which is hundreds of acres of solar, and what we want to talk about today. And the role that that needs to play and to really get some solution on climate change, which is what the topic is about today. What scale do we need to get to in Pennsylvania and globally with solar to make a difference on climate change? And the Pennsylvania 2030 solar study that was put together a couple of years ago with stakeholders from all over the state found, as most studies do, that rooftop or behind the meter solar can get us about 25% of the way to what we need in solar generation to make a difference on climate change. So about 3/4 of that clean energy from solar needs to come from utility scale solar. So as I said, this was 7, 8 years ago. Community Energy developed what was then the largest solar farm in Pennsylvania. This is 30 acres. So that's about 5 megawatts of solar, and it's about the size of what community solar projects would look like. So it could serve a number of customers. But it's a fraction of the size of what we're developing now. But one of the things I want to look at is some of the facts concerning how solar relates to farmland. And when we came into Lancaster County with this project proposed, the Lancaster County board said, hey, this is sacred farmland in Lancaster, and we are not interested in developing solar on farmland in Lancaster County. What we showed is that this farm, which you see in the upper left, and you see the buildings around it, had been a dairy farm. And then one of the buildings is a large poultry farm. It went to poultry farming. None of those economics worked at this scale. And the highway on your left is Lancaster Pike, south of Lancaster. So much of this land is under development pressure. And you see some of the subdivisions to the north. And this farm family, like many, was looking at what the next generation wanted to do with this farm. And so what we presented, which is what we do on all of our projects, is that on this acreage, we will install solar panels without grading the land. So we're not removing topsoil, as most subdivision does, or even significantly disturbing it. And we mount the solar panels on driven-in posts, much like fence posts. They're steel, but it's on the back of a pickup truck driving posts in, which farmers understand. So we're not using concrete collars in most cases. We generally don't at all. Other developers may have different practices, but it's easy for the locality to specify that we don't want concrete foundations, because if you don't, we can remove these posts at the end of the life of this project. And we post a bond, and most developers do, a decommissioning bond, so that the township has the funds available if we or other owners aren't around to remove this entire project. The panels are recycled or reused in other countries. Even after 30 years, they have more than half of their output left. So, and they're mostly glass, so they're recycled or reused. The steel is taken out of the ground, the steel racking is recycled, and the farmland is returned to agricultural use. In addition, what we do with the farmland during that 30 years is we plant grass, and I'll show you some of the more innovative things we're doing now with pollinator-friendly planting and grazing, so that the agricultural, the organic content, the agricultural value of the soil is actually increased over the 30-year life. So what it amounts to is allowing the land to lie fallow for 30 years, improving the organic content, and guaranteeing that it's returned for agricultural use in 30 years. When that story is told, as it was in Lancaster 8 years ago, there was unanimous approval to build this solar project because what it amounts to is solar farmland preservation without public dollars. This is what the project looks like from the Lancaster Pike, where we provide screening, and having a project fit in with the neighborhood is always part of what needs to be done. So that's a 30-acre project. Now let's look at what we need to do to get to utility scale. This is a project in Virginia that we developed for Amazon to power one of its servers. And it's 14 farmers and about 800 acres. And so you see the different farms from the aerial view, and the economics are the same. And that is all of that farmland is subject to, and you see some of the subdivision on the right and other uses. This farmland will not be developed for 30 years, and it has a bond so that you know that the land you're looking at there with solar panels will return to farmland in 30 years. In addition, to get to quickly what we need to do to scale to climate change is, in Pennsylvania, when you look at the combination of resources necessary to get to 80% decarbonation of the grid, solar will play between 10 and 20% of the total load, because you'll have wind, offshore wind, nuclear, probably some natural gas or battery peaking. And with 10 to 20% solar based on load, you can get to 80% decarbonization by 2030. And the IPCC says that economy-wide, we need to get to less than that by 2030, 45%, call it 50% reduction in carbon by 2030. But it's going to take longer in some industries. Cement industry, transportation, and others may take longer. Power industry, as we're seeing here, has the resources already in front of it to get to 80% decarbonization economically by 2030. So utility scale solar will be part of that. In terms of the amount of farmland that's required, in Pennsylvania, to get to 10% of the load, which is the governor's goal, by the way, 10% from solar by 2030, would be about 70,000 acres. That's about 1% of the farmland in Pennsylvania if you did it all on farmland, which of course you don't need to do. There's abandoned mine lands, there's other lands, but you need both. And 1% of farmland will get us to the goal. That is less than the amount that the USDA currently uses tax dollars in their reserve program to pay farmers to set aside farmland every year to let it lie fallow to improve the land. That's about 2%, 1 to 2%. It's about 200,000 acres in Pennsylvania that's under the reserve program and receiving payments per acre for dollars not to farm. They pay about $80 an acre. Farmers by farming, depending on the year, corn and beans, earn about 200 net, $200 to $250 per acre. The solar that you're looking at pays the farmer about 4 times that per acre, guaranteed for 30 years. So not only is it using private dollars to preserve farmland and set it aside to lie fallow and improve over 30 years, but it's using private dollars to do it, and it's paying the farmer 4 to 5 times the income they would normally get. The last thing I'll mention in the opening is farmland currently in most states, including Pennsylvania, has clean and green tax abatements so that the municipality earns less taxes on farmland than it does on development. And that's intended to preserve farmland. But the result is it's got a major impact on municipal revenues. And where would it put the incentive? Of course, if you need more tax dollars, the incentive would be to do more development, right? So that's why we are losing more than 1% farmland every few years in Pennsylvania already. So in addition to that solar acreage that you saw paying farmers 4 to 5 times the income they would normally get from farming, or 10 times the amount they get by setting aside under USDA tax dollars. Solar development pays municipal taxes at 6-8 times what it would get under the Clean and Green program. This slide I just threw in here to show you that with COVID pressure, Pennsylvania is rated under this National League of Cities graph as the worst in the nation in terms of revenue losses for cities, towns, and villages in 2020 in terms of a shortfall in tax revenue. The worst, not the bottom 10, the worst. So the time is perfect for looking at a win-win-win solution on developing solar in Pennsylvania, because it not only, 1, preserves farmland, 2, creates solid income for farm families for the next generation, and 3, increases local tax revenue. Finally, I want to look at I'll just finish up in a minute here, Laura, what the economics are. So, frankly, solar rec markets and small solar markets are necessary, but they are very inefficient in terms of the cost of building solar. And that's why you hear critiques of solar subsidies. The kind of solar that the customers here today made possible by signing long-term contracts provides the lowest cost financing, and the scale provides the lowest installation costs. So by doing utility scale solar, there is still some additional cost over the current cost of electricity. And that's shown on these blue bars. That goes away and actually shows a net positive by 2030. And that's what these leading customers, City of Philadelphia and University of Pennsylvania, led this curve and said, yeah, we'll pay a flat rate that conceivably could be a little bit higher in the next years, but we're going to get savings in the out years, and we're making all the differences I described on climate change. But the final piece that's little understood is we ran a study, and it's known nationally, so it wasn't a surprise, and PJM confirmed it. But once you get solar to scale in Pennsylvania at 5% or 10%, because solar generates power during peak summer days when energy is the most expensive, it's when all the utilities crank up their most expensive units to make the load. That raises the marginal price of energy for everyone. When you add solar at scale, you see the green line, you get solar saving, you get utility scale, you get wholesale energy price savings with price suppression on those peak days. The solar comes on strong, gives plenty of energy, you don't have to bring on the expensive units, and it lowers the price of energy for everyone. So the green on this line is hundreds of millions of dollars of savings for Pennsylvania utility customers only. There's actually savings broader across the entire 13-state region by adding 10% solar. So at 5% solar, the savings is $100 million. At 10% solar, the savings is $600 million. And you see how that wholesale savings dwarfs the costs of installing utility scale solar at about 7,000 megawatts, which is what 10% is. 7,000 megawatts would take about 50 to 60 customers, like you're going to hear from today, making that kind of decision. And so the impact of this leadership is more than token. It actually is driving forward what needs to be done on climate change. And customers like this, if we had enough of them, could actually do it without state policy. The sad fact is these benefits accrue to everyone, the economic benefits, the farm benefits, climate change benefits, and yet Pennsylvania solar policy today is capped at supporting 400 megawatts of solar. That's it. That's pretty close to the amount that's represented by the purchasers of solar on the customers you're going to hear from today. So it's just crying out for Pennsylvania solar policy to move forward. But today you're going to hear from leaders that made this difference on their own without waiting for state policy. So I'll stop there.
Okay. Thanks so much, Brent. I think you made a super compelling case for the power of utility scale solar to combat climate change while also benefiting farmers in Pennsylvania. I didn't even know those stats around, the amount paid per acre, and the fact that 2% of farmland is actually already lying fallow each year in Pennsylvania. And then
We
on
need to
top
get
of
that
that,
story out, don't we, Laura?
yeah, yeah, I totally. And then same with the energy cost and savings. I think all in, you made a super compelling case here for scaling up and following the lead of the city of Philadelphia and UPenn. But I think you may have undersold the role you've played in really making this possible, Brent. Community Energy has been the one on the ground actually speccing out the solar projects and is the developer for both the city and UPenn projects that Amanda and Ben will be sharing about now. So I just really want to give a big thanks to your leadership, Brent, in paving the way for this to be possible, for us to be sourcing clean energy from Pennsylvania rather than from out of state. So I'd love
They
to.
always say nothing happens until somebody sells something. So it's really the customers. So I'll stop and we'll hear from them.
Well, thank you, Brent. And I'll pass it now to Amanda. And we look forward to hearing from you about how Philadelphia signed on to the largest municipal solar purchase in the country. So thank you.
Great, thanks. I would like to share my screen, but I can't until Brent's screen sharing.
Oh dear, now we got to see. How about that? Does that do it?
Let's see, it should. Yep, let's see. All right.
Great.
Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, you can go full screen now.
How's that?
We're seeing presenter view.
Huh, okay. Let me try and fix that.
Yeah, take your time. In the meantime, actually, Brent, a question came in for you.
Okay.
Nancy Winkler asks, what study or expert is the source of the $600 million savings estimate by 2030 for 10% PA solar? Is that a community energy study or the PJM?
No, I'll give you the short version and happy to talk more than anybody about it. So because we knew this qualitatively, this effect was shown across the country, we had to document it in the PJM for Pennsylvania. So we retained the firm PowerGem, which is the firm that does the day ahead dispatch forecast for PJM every day. So it says how many units need to come on for today. And that's what's programmed. So it keeps our lights on. So by using that modeling, the same dispatch modeling that the PJM uses, we knew we were going to get an accurate and a credible result. So they ran the study using all the units they normally use to dispatch, but adding 7,000 megawatts of solar at locations where there's already interconnection applications filed. So we know it's feasible. And they ran that and then ran the locational marginal price, as they do every day on their economic model by hour, to show which units came on and what the price would be. So I can talk more about it, but it's the PJM, and we ran it by PJM, and they said, yeah, that makes sense. We got enough units to ramp up around solar. If you had solar at that level, you're going to suppress the most expensive hours pricing, and you're going to save everyone money.
Yeah, totally. Well, I think it would be interesting for folks to see that study if it's available publicly, is it?
Happy to share. I'll share it with you.
Okay, great. And if there's a link, you could even put it in the chat to everyone.
Okay, I can do that.
And send it, and we'll send around as follow up. All right, we've got your slide up, Amanda. You're good to go.
Okay, great. So thanks, Laura, and thanks, Brent, for that really great setup for talking about our specific projects. I am here today to share Philadelphia's story about our journey and how we got to our PPA project. And I'm excited to be presenting alongside of Community Energy and ENGIE, who have been our partners in our particular project. So just to do a little context setting, as Laura mentioned, I'm the energy manager for the city, overseeing our energy office, and we sit within the Office of Sustainability. The Sustainability Office is responsible for implementing Greenworks Philadelphia, which is our sustainability plan. And within that sustainability plan, we work within 8 visions. And our work pretty squarely falls within Vision 3 here, which is all Philadelphians efficiently use clean energy that they can afford. So that's really kind of the high level of where all this work is coming from, but also strong leadership from our administration. So, you know, we've been doing a lot in terms of climate action, and a lot of that stems from our mayor. So Mayor Kenney has committed us to staying in the Paris Climate Agreement, achieving 80% carbon emission reductions by 2050, and moving us to 100% renewable energy as a city. So, you know, we really have our work cut out for us here, and it's set up by great leadership by our mayor. So we have these lofty goals. We started out by really looking at, okay, we need to see where our emissions are coming from. And so, you know, we found that most of our emissions are coming from our built environment. And so from there, we need to, you know, kind of dig deeper than that. It's good to know that, but we really had to start looking at what our built environment looks like and how we can affect change and get to that 2050 goal within our built environment. So from that kind of high level overview, we started on this path of doing some energy planning. And so the result of that energy planning really formulated into these two plans that we came out with. So one is Powering Our Future. It's our clean energy vision for Philadelphia. And the scope there is all built environment within city limits. So, and that's really helping us to frame out how we're going to get to our 80 by 50 goal as a city. And then the other plan that came out of this work is our Municipal Energy Master Plan. And that's really what drives the Energy Office work. And I'll kind of explain a little bit more about that. But the scope there is city-owned assets, and specifically our general fund buildings, which are our buildings like Parks and Rec facilities, health centers, libraries, things like that, and also our streetlights. And so, you know, again, I'll talk a lot about this, but we set new 2030 goals, and that really helps us to be a leader in this space, and also parse out, you know, how can we get to 2050? We need to kind of backtrack into some 2030 goals and to help us kind of push us get to that 2050 goal. So from the Powering Our Future plan, starting by looking at, again, the entire built environment within Philadelphia, we looked at how are we going to, you know, what kinds of carbon emissions reductions do we need to be looking at here as a city? And so, you know, as Brent mentioned, really a big way that we need to get there, the biggest chunk that we found is by cleaning the electricity supply and cleaning up our electric grid. And again, this is citywide, and we work on a regional, we pull our energy off of a regional grid. So this isn't just one user here or there doing a project. It's really going to be coming together and amassing, you know, multiple renewable energy projects and replacing conventional fossil fuel generation on our grid with renewable energy projects. So taking that down to the municipal level. So again, my purview is the Energy Office. We oversee municipal energy operations. We're responsible for buying energy to supply our city buildings with energy. And then on the demand side, you know, we're promoting conservation and efficiency within our departments. We're developing projects and programs like PPAs, and of course, supporting our climate goals and energy goals for the city, and, you know, positioning us to be a leader in this space and lead by example, so that hopefully others, as we've seen, you know, continue to do some similar work. So looking at, you know, starting from a baseline, what's our current municipal energy use? What are we using? Where are we spending our money? You know, most of it is really in electricity, which, you know, lines up nicely with the work that really we all need to do to get to our clean energy grid. And so looking at our baseline and seeing where we need to go by 2050, we decided to set several 2030 goals to get there. And so those goals include reducing our emissions 50% by 2030 from city assets, reducing our energy use 20%, generating all of our electricity from renewable resources by 2030, and doing all of that while maintaining or lowering our energy cost. So we really like to carve out a lot of work for ourselves here, but it's all what needs to happen in order for us to get to that 80 by 50. So within our clean energy goal, how are we going to get to this 100% goal? Again, as Brent kind of alluded to, part of it can come from, we looked at the potential that can come from on-site. And so, we need to be doing that for sure, but that only gets us so far. And so what else can get us to that 100% goal? And it's going to be purchasing clean energy through avenues like PPAs. So that's really what's going to get us to, the biggest chunk of our electricity demand. Also, we, as the city, use a lot of electricity. So looking at how we can get the biggest bang for our buck and chip away at that 100% goal. So how did we get to a PPA? And something that we sort of did parallel to that energy planning was we put out a request for information several years ago, 4 years ago now, to start getting a lay of the land, see what's out there, see what recommendations folks had for a municipal entity to get into this space and start chipping away at climate change goals. And so we landed on power purchase agreement, and that's because again, we want to be a leader in this space and we know that we can't do it alone. So what we've really seen as we've finalized our PPA is that that's a core piece, and we want to encourage others to do this. We can't do it alone. So that's really a big outcome of doing something like this. We wanted to do a PPA also because it fits in really nicely with the way that we buy energy right now. So we're hedging out into the future. We hedge about 80% of our electricity supply a couple years out. And what a PPA does is it helps us continue to do that, but it helps us hedge out 20 years into the future at a competitive price that we can lock in now, and also give us the clean energy attributes that we want and help us get to our climate goals at the same time. That's also why we decided to do a physical PPA, which I can get into more if folks have questions about that, but really it fit in really nicely with the way that we buy energy. We also wanted to make sure that we're creating economic opportunity through this work, and I'll talk a little bit more about our goals there as well. But also the PPA structure, means that the city doesn't own or operate this project, which is important, and especially for the scale that we need to get to. The city is just not the best. We want to leave that to the experts, and so that was an important piece for us too. So, okay, then we decided PPA seems like the avenue that we want to go. What are our priorities within that avenue? So, cost, of course, is important, and making sure, again, that it fits in with our purchasing strategy. Another important piece was that the project ended up being close to Philadelphia, within certain proximity to Philadelphia. We wanted to make sure that benefits are coming back to Philadelphia in some way, shape, or form, Philadelphians, citizens of our city. And that really led into us needing our partner to commit to an economic opportunity plan. And so that was an important piece for us too in going through this work. So we went through our RFI process, we went through our RFP process, really discovered all these things that we needed out of our project, and came out with our selected project, which is Adams Solar. So this is a 70 megawatt project in Adams County, which is in central Pennsylvania-ish. It was, again, developed by Community Energy, and now it's owned and operated by ENGIE. It's approximately 700 acres. So again, giving that feel for how much space something, the amount of energy that we need to come from renewables, how much space that really takes up. And to give folks an idea, the analogy we like to give is that FDR Park in Philadelphia, this is over 2 FDR parks, which is, a really big space. And so that kind of also helps give an idea for how much space we need on site versus off site to get to our goals. It's a 20-year contract. And the city, again, does not own or operate, which is the most efficient way to set this up for us. So that's all I had. And I'm happy to answer questions that folks have about our project.
Great, thanks so much, Amanda. I think we'll open it up to Q&A towards the end. So let's go ahead and pass it over to Ben now from UPenn to share about their project. I know on the Philadelphia front, we were so excited as we announced our 70 megawatt project right on the heels of Penn State saying they did a 70 megawatt project. We said, oh, maybe we need to do 80 so we can still be the largest in the state. And then Penn shortly after came out with a 220 megawatt project. So we're no longer the largest.
I meant to mention that. Yeah, we were super excited to be the largest, but Penn had to go and upshow us. But we're really excited that this project is happening and that others are doing this work.
Well, actually, City of Philadelphia has some load left to catch up.
We do. We're only at about 20% of our load, so we're going to continue on this too. Yeah.
Indeed. Well, we were excited to be powering supporting the largest project for a few weeks there. And then Ben's team came out with this announcement, which we are so excited about. So I'm excited to pass it to you, Ben, to share more about that.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's a pretty exciting project. And yeah, we've been working on this for a number of years, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But thank you so much for the time and the opportunity to talk about this. It's something I'm really proud of. Our power purchase agreement. I'm going to go through the process for us, give people a taste for what this took in terms of effort and activities and planning. Hopefully give you a flavor for that. I'm going to go through it quickly because there's a lot to talk about. So a little background. Penn operates or purchases their electricity as a load-serving entity. And what that means is that we're similar to a typical electric utility. We buy our power from the grid, and then distribute it to our properties on Penn's campus. So we're operating, more or less the University of Penn Electric Company. It gives us the opportunity to buy our electricity rather cheaply because we're buying it directly from the grid and there's really no markups about passing it through a utility. But this also enabled us to be able to enter into a power purchase agreement directly with the developer and operators, as opposed to having to go through a utility or a middleman, so to speak. Benefits of this are that it gave us a lower price, which we're always looking for as a university and a cost-efficient university. It gave us the opportunity to vet the potential projects directly. So we weren't asking a PICO or a PP&L or one of those folks, a Constellation, to do it for us. We were doing it ourselves. So we got into the nitty gritty of each project and to make sure that it matched up with what our desires, wants, and needs were. And the other aspect is, and we were just talking about this, about the size, Penn consumes a lot of electricity. So this allowed us to be the only off-taker of a project. And by being the only off-taker, that made it more simple, allowed us to negotiate directly. We're not teamed up with other off-takers. So it enabled us to be able to get this done in a little more quicker fashion. Give you a little background on Penn's load. Here's some numbers about our operation. So when I talk about the LSC, or the load serving entity, that includes both the health system, the hospital system of Penn, University of Pennsylvania, as well as the academic side. So the main campus, that refers to the academic portion of our load serving entity. And then the entire LSC is the health system plus other properties that we own that are contiguous to the campus. So the main campus is about half of the overall LSC. We're looking at about 300,000 megawatt hours per year for the university side and about the same for the health system and some of the other properties. So when we were going out to get projects to bid on this, we decided that supporting the entire LSC was the way to go to get the best cost efficiency because of the size and scope. Now, when we break down what the cost components are when we buy electricity or have to purchase it for campus, there's basically 5 pieces. There's the generation piece, which makes up over half of the cost of each megawatt hour or kilowatt hour that you purchase. There's a capacity piece that we also pay for, which is part of the load serving entity's costs. And then you've got the transmission and distribution costs that you pay to the PECOs, the utilities, and the people that own the wires and the poles. And then the gross receipts tax is what we pay to the city because we operate within their boundaries. The two pieces that this power purchase agreement addresses are the generation and the capacity. So 70% of our per kilowatt hour cost is this agreement affects. And that's a big element. So when we started this project, or actually we announced the power purchase agreement, there was a lot of questions on campus as why now? Why didn't you do this before? Why didn't you wait? What makes a difference now? And one of the main reasons is that because costs have come down to the point where they're competitive with fossil fuel plants, with basically the spot market price that we're paying. So as some of the other presenters have mentioned, the cost for solar have dropped significantly, and it's a really good time to really consider this. We also have a very aggressive climate action plan, and the ability for us to eliminate the carbon from 75% of our electric load takes a big bite out of our carbon reduction or our carbon emissions and puts us on track to our 2042 goal of carbon neutrality. We also, as a university, like to have some budget certainty as we proceed through the years. And the ability for us to more or less lock in a fixed price or a known price for 20 plus years is very helpful for us in our planning. If we know we're going to pay for electricity over the next 20 years, our budget and finance folks are very, very happy because they can plan what they're going to need to pay for electricity as we go into the out years. And even if there's a little bit of a premium for that, that certainty really gives them comfort and makes it easier for us to plan and not have so much reserves in case of hiccups. There was also the benefit of the federal investment tax credits. We were looking at both solar and wind when we went out for our proposals for renewable energy. And these are going to start to decline and eventually expire over the next few years. Unfortunately, our current government is not renewing these or increasing these. So we just felt this was the time to take advantage of them because it does affect the cost that we're paying for the electricity from the renewable sources. And finally, we also were monitoring, what types of projects were available. And we see that there are a number of developers that were putting projects together and starting to plan them, putting them into the queue for PJM. And so we felt that there was a significant number that would give us good competitive costs when we went out with our RFP. So as Amanda mentioned, we had some objectives, that drove why we did this and how we were going to do it and what we wanted to get out of it. The main ones being that we wanted to minimize carbon emissions without taking on significant financial risks. And so those were the main drivers for us in doing this. We wanted to reduce campus carbon dioxide emissions, to meet our carbon action plan goals. We wanted to get pricing that was as close to spot market prices, which is what we pay now for electricity. So we're not paying a premium. And then we wanted to get, as I said, a fixed cost, a hedge. We have looked in the past at purchasing financial hedges and have purchased financial hedges to give us some price certainty in our electricity. But by being able to buy a fixed price of electricity, we're not paying a premium for those hedges. And this was a nice benefit to our finance and budget folks. And lastly, we wanted the site to be within the PJM region. If you're not familiar with how the grid works, PJM more or less stands for Pennsylvania, Jersey, and Maryland when it was first put together. But it really encompasses the area, the Pennsylvania, East and West, contiguous states. And we wanted the generation facility to be in the PJM grid so that we're tying into the grid that we're also drawing electricity from. So I want to go through the process. There's a number of steps here, but I think it's good to understand all the things that went into getting us from start to finish. So first we identified there was an opportunity for renewable energy due to price decreases. We had been monitoring the market over the last 3, 4, 5 years. Actually, further back I think 7 years ago, we actually looked at another project and decided that the costs were too high. But we've been keeping an eye on what prices were being paid for solar and renewable energy projects. And we saw the prices had finally come down to a point where it made sense for us to look at it more deeply. So we hired a consultant, Emerald Energy, to help us do a financial analysis in light of what our operational and financial needs were. They put together an analysis that we presented to leadership. The analysis showed that a power purchase agreement for renewable energy made sense, that there was a cost benefit or potential cost benefit, as well as an environmental benefit. And they gave us the approval to proceed with issuing an RFP. So we put the RFP out to 38 developers. We kind of, hit everybody who's in the PJM region and asked them to provide a proposal. We got back 17 developers responded, but we had 102 offers. And that's because a number of the developers have multiple projects in their portfolio, and they also had different ways of pricing them. So each offer, it's not necessarily 102 different sites, but each site may have had a couple of different ways that it was priced, and length of the contract, the amount of energy from it. And so we went and we had to evaluate all these offers. We checked them for technical analysis, financial analysis. It was a pretty comprehensive look at what the market was offering. We ended up selecting 3 developers for a short list, and we brought them in for interviews. We delved deeper into their proposals, and ultimately we selected Community Energy. At this point, we needed to get to a contract or the power purchase agreement itself. And none of us at Penn, being experts or even experienced in how these things are written or what needs to go into them, we hired the law firm of Cozen O'Connor to help us with that aspect. And they have a specialty in this area. And I'll be honest with you, it was one of the best things we ever did, because it helped us get through this process of negotiating a contract and getting it to where both us and Community Energy were happy with the outcome in a fairly short time frame. So we negotiated a term sheet first, and what this does is it gives you the basic tenets of the power purchase agreement. It dictates where it will be, how big it will be, how much power will be generated, and a bunch of the details that ultimately go into the power purchase agreement. But it gets you kind of a framework, a skeleton, so to speak, of what the power purchase agreement will have in greater detail. And by getting that done, it gave us something to work off of as we went through the negotiations on the contract. And as I said, we eventually negotiated the contract and were able to sign that in February. The schedule is something that I'm also pretty proud of. We issued our RFP back in June of 2019. Now, let me back up part of that. As I said, we were looking at this for probably the last 2 or 3 years prior to that, issuing the RFP. So back in 2016, we started looking at renewable power in more detail. And it was, as we were monitoring the market and where projects were and what people were paying for them and what our peers were doing, it wasn't until the end of 2018 that we decided it was time to step into into the pool and see what we could get. That's when we hired our consultant to help us with the analysis. The analysis was done in January, February. We got approval in early spring, and then we issued our RFP in June. A month later, we got the proposals from the different developers. Fairly reasonable amount of time. Most of these developers have the projects already queued up, so asking them for the details was not a big ask for them to get it done, other than the fact that it was over the July 4th weekend as well. But we still got a healthy number of proposals, as I said before. We reviewed those for about a month. It took us a while to get through the over 100 proposals and prioritize them, analyze them, and pick the ones that we felt were the most appropriate. Took us another couple of weeks to interview the shortlisted entities and select who we wanted, which was Community Energy. Of course, at this point, we needed to get approval from our leadership, our board of trustees, to only meet 5 to 6 times a year. So their next meeting after the September 9th timeframe was in November. So we put together a packet for them to get their their blessing that it was okay for us to move forward with negotiating a contract with Community Energy. So meanwhile, while we're waiting for the trustee meeting to come along, we started negotiating the terms of the power purchase agreement. And as I said, the term sheet became the outline of what the power purchase agreement itself included. And it's a very helpful element to do, because it really then gives you, it speeds up the process because you're not dealing with all the different, words and wording of a contract as you're trying to go through the details of what the technical aspects of the project are going to be. So breaking it into these two pieces really, I think, made the process quicker in getting to the final endpoint. So after the term sheet was negotiated, as you can see, it took us about 3 months to get through that. It took us another 3 months to get to the end and negotiate the terms of the power purchase agreement itself, the contract. And we finally signed the contract in February of 2020. So a process that took about 8-9 months, which from what I understand in comparing ourselves to other entities who have gone through this process was pretty fast. If you talk to other entities who have done power purchase agreements, a year to 2 years is not unheard of in getting from start to finish. And it's something that we completed in well under a year. So I'm pretty proud of the fact that we were able to get to an endpoint with everyone being happy with the outcome. And now we're looking at commercial operation at the end of 2022. So by 2023, we are expecting to have renewable power coming into the grid. So some of the details of the results, I haven't gone through this, but as I said, the power purchase agreement will provide 75% of Penn's electricity from a renewable source, which is about 450,000 megawatt hours per year. It'll reduce our overall carbon emissions for the entire campus by about 24% from our 2009 baseline, which is where we are measuring ourselves with regards to our climate action plan. We'll be able to meet we'll be meeting the Paris Accords by 2023, 7 years ahead of the goal, which is 2030. It's a 25-year contract, so we'll have a 25-year hedge on electricity purchases, and based on our projections, we expect electricity prices to increase at a greater rate than the cost for what we're paying will be. And so, as Brent was saying, as you go into the outer years, we're expecting to be seeing a discount for what we're paying for electricity from this project. And finally, we're proud of the fact that we're going to be able to contribute to the city's goal of cutting carbon pollution by 80% by 2050. As Amanda was saying, this is a citywide effort, not just the city itself, but all the built environment within the city. So we'll be adding to that effort by this project. So finally, I want to give you kind of some of the lessons learned and maybe some recommendations on if you're thinking about proceeding or looking at this, things to keep in mind. The first is to hire a trusted and experienced support team. We're not all experts in renewable energy, the electric grid, and all the details of that. So getting some folks on your team that know what they're doing, have done this before, have been through the ringer, will really benefit you in the long run. Then you have to do your homework. Even though you're hired an experienced team, you still need to know a lot about the process and the technology and the market and how these things work, so you can be informed and knowledgeable within your own organization. Then you want to do some preliminary analysis. You want to figure out what you want to get and what you might get. The two might not always match up. You may think what you're going to get is cheap energy in another year quickly, and then you look at the market and you'll realize this is what the realities are. And then you need to reconcile whether or not that matches up, that you can accept, what the realities are versus what you want. That's an important aspect, to be prepared for what you might see as you go through the process. You also want to engage stakeholders from throughout your organization. This is not an effort that should be done solo or done within one piece of an organization. It's really something that needs buy-in from the financial folks, the operations folks, the budgeting folks within your organization. So everyone's on the same page, everyone understands the risks, everyone agrees to what ultimately will be selected and purchased, so that you have backing when there are maybe hiccups along the way. And I'm gonna reiterate again, you need to learn. You need to understand how this process works. You gotta understand the electric market. I'm not saying you need to be an expert, but you need to know what you're talking about and what your proposals are talking about as you review them, so you know what you're getting and you get what you want. And then finally, you want to rely on your team. I can't say enough about the team of Emerald Energy and Cozen O'Connor, how much they helped us. They held our hands. They walked us through the process. They've been through this before. They were able to foresee potholes and issues and drive us around them. And I'll be honest, I don't think we could have gotten this done in 8 months without their support and effort. So it's something that I really recommend, is getting some experts on your team to help you through it. And that's about it. Lot went on, a lot of details, and as Laura said, we'll answer questions at the end, but more than willing to hear anything you guys want to hear more about. So thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Ben. I really appreciate your lining up all of the recommendations you have and laying out the timeline and the factors in your decision-making process. I felt like that was super helpful. And I know that we have some folks on the call today who are considering doing a project of their own. And that's really a goal we have here, is to support others to follow the lead of the city and Penn. So thank you for those detailed comments.
More than willing also, people to reach out to me. You can find me, but yeah, if people want to talk, offline, or in the future, reach out to me. This is a process that, we're really proud of and really want to share with others and want to see others, mimic if they can. So
incredible. Well, we'll be sure to share your contact information as follow-up with folks in case they want to reach out to you.
Great.
Good. All right. Well, now I want to pass it to our final speaker, Matt Mooney from NG. So I know Ben and Amanda both shared that Penn and the city are not owning these systems, and Brent's team played a critical role in the upfront development, but then they passed the ownership over to NG, or a long-term owner-operator. So NG is the long-term owner-operator for the city project specifically, I should say. But excited to hear from Matt now. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. As you mentioned, NG is going to be the long-term owner-operator of the city project. To give you a little bit more background about who we are as an organization, we're one of the largest independent power producers in the world. We're a multinational corporation. We operate power plants across most of the continents, and especially here in North America, we are really active in renewables. I work on the utility scale solar projects that NG does in North America. I focus mostly on the deregulated wholesale markets. And so I'm intimately familiar with the city's project. I've spent a lot of time working on it. And really the idea is that you have companies like Community Energy that go out and do the early work of, putting together these projects, as Brent explained, and they really seed the industry. And then once they get to a point where there's a buyer for a PPA, then that's really where you can start to see the commercial future materializing for these projects. So if you wouldn't mind putting up my slides.
Yeah, Ben, if you just stop sharing your screen, then we'll pull.
Have two to share.
Yeah, I'm trying to get there. Hold on.
Thank you.
Let's see. Great.
Now Morgan should be able to pull them up. Excellent. There we go.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
All right, very good. So here we are. What we do a lot of are PPAs with customers like the city or UPenn that are going out and voluntarily buying renewables. And so when I have the acronym MUSH up there, and that stands for municipalities, universities, schools, and hospitals, of which UPenn and the city would fit that profile of customer. And last year we signed about 1,300 megawatts of PPA contracts. As you can see the breakdown there, about 540 of utility scale solar, and the remainder of that was wind. And we mostly focus on the the deregulated wholesale markets. I really want to stress that, as we've discussed a lot today, that the PPA really is the main driver for bringing these projects forward. It really is the document that gets the buyer of the energy, the seller, as well as the investors, which is the tax equity investors who buy the tax credits from the investment tax credits that Ben mentioned. And then also, if there's going to be lenders in the project, this is the document that everybody works off of to get comfortable with investing and breathing life into these assets. So if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, I'll go into some of the risk examples that you see if you're a PPA off-taker. So a lot of times what you see are, in PPA, it really depends on you as the customer, what are you most comfortable with. Oftentimes it's, you want certainty and long-term price in your wholesale energy price. And so that's most often what you see, but that's also a risk. So if energy prices, wholesale energy prices go below what the strike price is in the PPA for the long-term contract, then that contract could, as they say, be upside down. There's several ways to mitigate that, and we're starting to see more innovation out there. You could do an index to the market wholesale price. You could do a collar. There's a variety of ways to address that. Another risk you have as an off-taker is you have shape and the production risk that goes along with that. So typically, most contracts that you see are what you would call unit continued. So the buyer is buying as the seller generates. And so that's, fairly predictable, with solar, with utility scale. The sun comes up every day. It might be, more or less depending on cloud cover, but that shape is going to be pretty consistent day in and day out throughout the seasons. And so sometimes there's ways where you can alter that. You can, turn that around to somebody like ENGIE and say, okay, ENGIE, I'm not comfortable with this. Can you give me a firm fixed shape? And we're a big balance sheet organization. We have our own internal trading desk, and we have the ability to manage those kinds of risks. Another topic that Ben and Brent and Amanda discussed is the term risk. So you have some kind of visibility in the near term. Oftentimes there's there is a futures market, and a lot of times prices are determined by the energy that's trading on the margin. Oftentimes in PJM, Pennsylvania, that the generating units that are setting that marginal price are natural gas. And so you can have some kind of certainty based on what the forward curve of natural gas is. But typically that doesn't track as far out as the PPA term. So you have maybe have like some visibility into the next 5 years, but your PPA is, say for example, 20 years, and so you've got term risk that you've got to manage. And some of the items I mentioned earlier are some of the ways you can mitigate that. On the generator side, we really do need a long-term PPA to attract investors and to attract capital to support the project. So that really is kind of one of the tension points. Tenors have been going lower, but often it's there's a floor there in terms of how short the tenor can go. Next slide, please. So here I'll go over some of the generator risk examples. So these are the risks that ENGIE is comfortable managing. This is what we do every day. We operate power plants across the world and in North America, and specifically in PJM. And so there's things like negative gamma, basis, shape, curtailment, and those are mostly transmission driven. There are some tools that the market offers to mitigate those, so financial transmission rights, and those are available in MISO in New York, or New England ISO and PJM. And then there's CRRs and ERCOT. These are really just kind of mitigants and tools to optimize the asset. If there's something severe, which neither party wants in terms of negative basis or curtailment, those kinds of tools aren't really going to help much. What can help though is if you have your operator is a big company like Engie, and we have portfolios of assets across the continent, and then also within a market. And so if you have a stable generator on the other side who can say, okay, maybe we have a project that's going through a hard period, at least the generator isn't going to go under the platform of the parent company. There's also regulatory risks. So a lot of us working on the city project are intimately familiar with the June 2018 FERC order regarding out-of-market payments. We're still working together to figure out a way to address that. There's also Dodd-Frank compliance, both sides. And if you're working in PJM, oftentimes it's a financially settled contract. There's a lot of Dodd-Frank compliance obligations that need to be addressed in the contract, and usually consultants and the seller can figure that out. And then there's your garden variety generator owner risk. There's development, construction. Those are usually the early stages of the life of the asset. And then of course operations, the long-term period, which is, as Brent was discussing, the 30 to 35 year time horizon. And then you've got some resource risk. Our obligation as the owner is to make sure that plant is available to run if the sun is shining to the best extent possible. It's in both sides' interest to do that. Nevertheless, there may be external forces that may impact that. You may have more generation than you expected, which generally that may not be a bad thing, but it's something to consider. And then there's of course the undergeneration. If something happens to your plant, there's an ice storm that takes out some of the modules, things like that you got to work through. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you. So as some of the other panelists have discussed, this is a really interesting time for utility scale solar. I put a couple of graphs up here together to kind of show where we are. So this comes from Bloomberg New Energy Finance, and it's showing the top graph there. It has the solar tracking, which is the orange below the fix, which is the yellow, and it really shows that in the Mid-Atlantic and PJM, the levelized cost of energy is really at parity with the power prices that we're seeing out there. And then the next graph you've got there below is the forecast for additions of 2020 to 2025. And really you see that utility scale PV, the bright yellow, is really going to dominate all the other categories in terms of new additions going forward. And then of course you see in 2022, 23, where you've got the ITC lined up. That's really the spike of additions that you see in the forecast. And I think Ben mentioned that earlier in terms of the considerations that they were taking into account for contracting and PPA. And then if you wouldn't mind going to the next one. Thank you. So for we've talked a little bit about the interconnection queue today, and so I put up a snapshot here of what's in the study queue, and this is goes back all the way to the AA1 vintage. So you know, I think the main takeaway from this information is, you know, you see the most recent vintages, and you've got solar really, you know, dominating the queue in terms of new interconnection requests that are being added. And then if you wouldn't mind, go to the next one. This will break it down by state. So we've got just solar positions in PJM, and you can see Virginia and Ohio are in the lead. And then, you know, Pennsylvania, very respectable, 10,000 megawatts proposed in the study queue. I think the average of, you know, what actually ends up being put into service in the queue in PJM is approximately 25%. So if you take, you know, that 10,000 number right there, you know, I think it's very reasonable that, you know, based on where we sit today, you would expect to see about 2,500 megawatts of those actually reach fruition. And then, you know, going forward, you know, I think as you know, people figure out, like, you know, community energy, you know, which projects, which, you know, locations are the best fit, you know, you'll see the projects will get better, and really there hopefully will be more acceptance once you know, the message that Brent mentioned earlier, that, you know, this is in terms of, you know, what the actual land that this takes up, it's a postage stamp, you know, compared to the overall ag land that's available. Next slide, please. So this is my last slide, and I you know, I kind of put this up there for just folks to just kind of think about. It's something that, you know, these are kind of questions we ask ourselves. So, you know, what are the barriers to entry, you know, for smaller C&I customers, for residential, you know, who would, you know, people who may not, you know, want to go with a rooftop option, but, you know, they still want to participate in utility scale solar projects. And then also smaller C&I customers. So, you know, customers that may not have, you know, investment grade credit rating and a big balance sheet like UPenn or the city. You know, how are they going to participate in buying utility scale projects, solar projects? And so the things that we try to think about are, you know, customer aggregation. You know, how can we, you know, contract, you know, incremental purchases, you know, and so a few ways to think about that is if you have, you know, an anchor tenant like UPenn or the city who has, you know, bought the majority of the volume of the output of a project with their PPA, and, you know, would there be something that, you know, you can offer to folks who may not have, you know, the resources of those kinds of institutions. And then, you know, there's also a lot of interesting models. So, like, for example, in California, there's been an emergence of the CCA, which are these clean choice aggregations, and we have counties and municipalities that have put together their own sustainability goals with their communities, and they've, you know, banded together to create these entities that, and many of them don't have credit ratings yet, but, you know, based on the resources that have been put together by their communities, they would be, you know, just as creditworthy and strong as UPenn or the city. So those are some of the thoughts I'll leave you with. Next slide. My contact information. Thank you so much for having me on this panel, and I'm happy to answer any questions you guys may have, or if you'd like to send me a note, please feel free to do so.
Great. Thanks so much, Matt. That was great and really insightful to have the perspective of NG at the panel today. One piece I found really interesting was that you shared over 10,000 megawatts of solar projects are already in the interconnection queue. And I know Brent earlier had mentioned we need 7,000 megawatts of solar in Pennsylvania to meet the 10% solar goal that the governor has laid out. So I'm interested to hear both from you and Brent what factors you think will determine whether we get that 7,000 megawatts built. It sounds like the sites have been identified and the projects are there. So I'm interested to hear what you think will determine whether we meet that goal. If you want to start out, Matt.
Sure. Yeah. I'm happy to. So really, it's a combination of different things. So, when a project goes through, starts from concept of a developer who's proposing it, there's tons of steps that it has to go through, and one of which is the queue, in order to be really de-risked. And by de-risked, I mean really you're saying you're checking 3 big boxes. So one of those boxes is permitting. You have to have acceptance from the community, and it has to be approved and by the local township and the county, and so that's a big hurdle. Also, you have to have land, so you need to have long-term agreements with the landowners who like Brent mentioned are willing to take a look towards the future, and perhaps do something different than what they've been doing before. So that's those are the two boxes. The second one is the interconnection, and really what you want to see are projects that are going to have understood costs to build their point of interconnection to inject onto the grid. So a lot of these projects proposed, they're just speculative. They're in an early study stage, and it may be determined by PJM or the utility. Well, if we interconnect this project, it might cost tens of millions of dollars because we need to upgrade these lines to be able to accommodate the extra energy. And so it may just be that it's it's in a hard spot on the grid where there's a lot of congestion, and that can really affect whether or not a project can affordably inject onto the grid. And so I think those are all considerations. And then once you've got those 3 boxes pretty well understood or checked, you need a PPA. You got to have a buyer. You got to have somebody who's willing to say, I want to do this for a combination of reasons, whether it be economic, just a good business decision, or the right thing to do because it helps to meet sustainability goals. And so all of those things really need to line up. And so that's to say that there is some attrition. Not all of those 10,000 megawatts will be built. A lot of them will, and it's just something that happens over time.
Laura, thanks.
And
Go ahead, Brent. If
Laura,
you're video, you
can you still? Hey, Laura, can you still hear me? It's Brent.
Yeah, we hear you. And if you can turn on your video if you want.
Okay, I'm actually traveling, but yeah, following up on you need the buyer. So Penn and the City of Philadelphia and others are taking the leadership and doing the analysis and entering into the contracts that allow the financing in place with ONG to build, for their load, right? But as somebody already asked the question, Pennsylvania is sadly low in terms of the requirements of utilities to buy solar for their customers, for the vast majority of customers that aren't able or willing to step up on that kind of leadership. So the fact is, it's pretty simple state policy that's both economic and tax favorable and generates jobs for the state legislature to step up and say it's time for Pennsylvania utilities to do what Penn and City of Philadelphia are doing for their customers. they need to step up and sign long-term contracts for solar. And with that, it would be easy, really easy and beneficial for everyone in terms of rates, jobs, and taxes to build 7,000 megawatts of solar in Pennsylvania by 2030. So it is just clearly a legislative block at the moment. And sadly, it's because so far natural gas politics in Pennsylvania have controlled the day, and nothing else gets in. Nuclear looked for some subsidies that it needed, didn't get it. Solar is capped at 0.5%, which is sadly low and just embarrassing, frankly, compared to other states. So we need a very simple policy into the current decade and into the current economics from the Pennsylvania State Legislature.
Thanks, Brent. And so when you talk about policy, I assume you're referring to the solar carve out of the alternative energy portfolio standard. Maybe you could just talk about that a tiny bit more for those who may not be familiar. And then I think building on what you're sharing, I'd be interested to hear if you expect any utilities to voluntarily procure offsite solar as the city and Penn have done. I know the Earthquaker Action Team has been making this ask along with Power of PECO. I think they actually are doing an action this morning on that, asking PECO to source solar in their next default service plan. I'm wondering if you expect to see any movement there.
Well, first, on the first part, yes, there is a portfolio standard in Pennsylvania with a specific solar carve out for Pennsylvania solar that could be amended. That would be principally the best way to get more rooftop solar built, which is required. The lowest cost way to get utility scale solar built is with long-term contracts. And you heard that today, that it's like building a house with a 30-year mortgage, very affordable, or building a house with a 5-year mortgage or a 3-year mortgage, which is how the current energy markets are set up. So they're not set up for long-term capital assets. They're set up for fuel-based assets. And would there be any housing market anywhere if you had 5-year mortgages? Of course not. So that's exactly what's required. Long-term contracts, off-take purchasers for utility scale solar of the type you've heard described today. And the utilities would be happy to do it and should be compensated to do it in rates, and ratepayers will benefit, but the state legislature has to act first. So we're going to need the AEPS, which is the portfolio standard, needs to be updated. And then you need long-term contracts for the utility scale solar part. Very simple additions. There's bills pending already. And frankly, they've just been blocked by what I will characterize, frankly, as natural gas politics in Pennsylvania, which needs to give way to a broader diversity of resources. On your second point, I think the short answer is probably not, even though there are some well-intentioned utilities that see, PECO included, Exelon, that see benefits long-term of electrification, vehicle and other, and renewable energy and solar particularly. So they would certainly support it. But with rates controlled by the PUC, they're going to need legislative authority to do it.
Got it. Thanks, Brent. Well, I have another question actually for Amanda, and then I'll shift to some of the ones we've gotten in the chat here. So if you have any other questions, feel free to add them, though we are coming up on time. So one of the focuses of Solar Week is using solar as a tool to drive the recovery of the economy and really about putting people back to work. So Amanda, I know that the Economic Opportunity Plan took this into account for the city project, you know, both with the location of the project being in Pennsylvania close enough so that solar workers, Philadelphia-based workers could engage and actually be employed on the site. And we were able to build out a training plan with Community Energy and NG for some of the Bright Solar Futures students to participate. But I'd love to hear more about the thought process there from the city's perspective.
Yeah, and definitely a good point with everything happening around COVID right now. And again, coming from the city, we just, you know, such a huge value to be able to bring any benefits from this project to the citizens of Philadelphia. And so there were kind of three things that we looked at when we were considering what would be good inputs into an economic opportunity plan. And so, you know, looking at the contracting piece, Laura, as you talked about, you know, pulling in, utilizing training that's going on in Philadelphia for folks to be able to learn how a construction project like this would work. Looking at education sessions and job fairs in both Philadelphia and in Adams County. And then also working with Philadelphia partners to provide outreach and look at existing workforce development that's happening already. And, you know, again, that goes to the connection we've been able to make with the Energy Authority's training program. So yeah, this was really an important piece of this project.
Thanks, Amanda.
Yeah.
And we did get a couple of questions in for you, Ben. So this will be the last set before we close out here. One was about whether the students were involved at all in the power purchase agreement planning at Penn, and then also where the project will be located.
Okay, so the second one is easier to answer. It's in Franklin County, South Central PA. Farmland that the owners have determined that it's much more financially and beneficial to them to lease it for solar use than its current use. So they're actually very pleased with the opportunity that they're being given. As far as student involvement, no, we did not include students in the process. It didn't really seem like something that there was a lot of decision making at the student level that was necessary. This was a very complicated and operational decision. So I can't say we didn't see that there was a benefit of having students involved with the process because we knew the outcome would be something that they would benefit from. So,
Thanks, Ben. Thanks
Sure.
so much, and thanks for your willingness to provide, or continue to be a resource for folks on the call. So I appreciate all of you sharing your contact info, and we can circulate that to the attendees as follow-up. But I know I learned a lot from this panel, including the fact that there really are costs that are offset. I didn't realize the federal government payments to farmers are happening to result in 2% of farmland being fallow. And then I also didn't realize that Penn was actually paying to purchase financial hedges that could be offset by the solar project. And then again, so compelling to see, Matt, your slide on the, and Brent as well, on the savings that result from these projects in terms of grid power. So thank you all for an informative panel. I think just in closing, I'll share a couple of pieces. One is that Solar States has a podcast. They're one of our partner installers on the Solarize Philly program. And their YoSun podcast is featuring speakers from each of the panels this week. And so Brent will be doing an interview with them, and you can find the interview at solarstates.com or wherever you listen to podcasts. So if you want to hear a deeper dive with Brent, go there. And then Morgan, if you want to pull up the calendar, so we have that up in terms of next steps here. But we're so excited to have all of you all sign on for our third Solar Week webinar. And tomorrow we have our fourth, which is focused on commercial solar projects. We actually just yesterday announced that the first CPACE funded solar project in Pennsylvania was signed here in Philadelphia. And so that'll be discussed on the panel tomorrow, which is moderated by my colleague, Mary Rose Martinez. And we will also be joined by Alliance HSP, the developer of the building at 5th and Spring Garden that Solar States is just now completing an installation on, the first multi-tenant commercial solar project in the Commonwealth. So those two projects, along with the SEPTA solar project, will be featured on the panel tomorrow. And then tomorrow evening, we will have the virtual solar home tour. So this is part of our Solarize Philly program supporting Philadelphia small business owners and homeowners to consider solar for their properties. We're providing free solar assessments to anyone who signs up at solarizephilly.org. And this event tomorrow is an opportunity to hear from homeowners who have already gone solar about their experience, and they'll be doing many Zoom tours of their solar installations. And then on Friday, we have a full schedule. We'll be doing a session with Pico in the morning for solar developers on doing solar business in Philadelphia. and interconnection best practices. And then in the afternoon, we'll be holding a graduation ceremony and actually having Laura Bean from NG, the Chief Renewables Officer of NG North America, join us for a keynote. So we're grateful to NG's participation this week. And that'll be followed by a career panel of some of the graduates of the Bright Solar Futures training programs speaking about their careers. So thanks everyone for joining, and we'll hope to see you tomorrow.
Thanks, Laura.
All right, bye everyone.
Thank you, Laura.
Thanks, everyone.